Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to completely reframe one of the most famous and, frankly, most misunderstood narratives in all of biblical literature. Today, we're looking at the story of Samson, but we're not treating it like some simple morality tale. Instead, we're diving into a terrifying revelation of cosmic geography, sacramental ontology, and the total collapse of a consecrated human life.
So let's dive right in. We really need to set aside those simplistic, sanitized Sunday school stories of a muscle man with a weakness for women, because what we're actually uncovering is a much deeper cosmic tragedy. I promise you this is absolutely not just a story about a bad haircut. If you read it as a tragic romance, you are completely missing the cosmic architecture of the text. What we're really looking at is an enacted parable of spiritual adultery. It's a massive crisis of human perception, and it shows just how fragile consecration is when it's dragged into hostile territory.
Moving into Section 1, the geography of descent. We're starting our explainer by tracking Samson's downward trajectory, both spatially and thematically. To really grasp the spiritual urgency of his fall, we've got to look at the exact ground he's standing on. It's a literal and a spiritual fall right into enemy territory. Now, what's incredibly fascinating here is the Hebrew root verb yorad. The biblical narrator uses this word over and over again. It translates to he went down. And why does that matter? Because in biblical theology, geography is never neutral, right? Geography is theology. Yorad maps out not just a physical, topographical decline from the Judean hills down to the Philistine plains, but a definitive spiritual descent into profoundly profane territory. Samson is crossing a highly contested border where God's righteous order and the chaotic forces of the Philistines are violently colliding.
And this brilliantly illustrates how sin rarely destroys everything all at once. Think about this trajectory. Samson's descent happens in 3 very gradual accommodating stages that drag him deeper and deeper into the profane. It starts with his bride in Timnah. Then he moves deeper to the prostitute in Gaza. And finally, it reaches its absolute terminal climax with Delilah in the Sorek Valley. At every single stage, this consecrated deliverer is compromising with the surrounding culture, transforming his own life into a living, terrifying portrait of Israel chasing after foreign gods.
So the crucial takeaway here is that Samson's visual appetite, his desire for covenant outsiders, acts as a tragic mirror for the entire nation of Israel. When he goes down to Timnah, his very first recorded words are, "I have seen a woman. She is right in my eyes." That specific phrasing, it's an intentional, chilling echo of Genesis chapter 3. So while Samson's physical, external vision is razor sharp, his internal spiritual perception has become completely corrupted. He's totally overriding the sacred canopy of his covenantal identity just to pursue the forbidden.
That brings us to Section 2, the Sorek Valley Threshold. Let's see how this gradual erosion of perception leads Samson directly into the treacherous theological ground where he's ultimately destroyed. When Samson steps into this contested boundary, he is literally walking away from the safety of Yahweh's vineyard. The Hebrew name for this area, Nahal Sorek, translates to choice vine. It's a volatile, liminal threshold space. It is caught exactly between the covenantal order of Israel and the chaotic, anti-creational forces of the Philistines. It's an in-between space where divine and human wills violently clash.
And of course, it's right here that he meets Delilah. Now, her name is a literal theological warning. Delilah likely derives from the Hebrew root verb dalal, which translates to weaken, languish, or hang down. She is perfectly named for her exact cosmic function. She operates as a trickster archetype, a literal agent of decreation sent by the kingdom of darkness to systematically undermine and drain the divine strength of Israel's judge.
So this represents the ultimate liminal crisis, and it is just dripping with cosmic irony. Instead of abiding in God's sacred vineyard, anchored in divine strength and holy protection, the protector of Israel attaches himself to a counterfeit, seductive vine of chaos. The Sorek Valley is the exact threshold where Israel's covenantal protector just hands over his sacred canopy to the enemy.
Moving on to Section 3, the sacramental walking sanctuary. To truly grasp the horror of what happens next in this valley, we have to completely rethink the actual source of Samson's power. Yeah, it's time to talk about the hair.
See, before he was even conceived, the angel of Yahweh declared Samson would be a Nazirite from the womb. The Hebrew word Nazir means dedicated or set apart, consecrated by God for a specific holy purpose. This means his uncut hair was absolutely not some magical talisman. We aren't dealing with a pagan myth about a demigod's Achilles heel here.
This is really all about sacramental ontology. Samson essentially functioned as a mobile, walking sacred space. Everywhere he went, God's consecrated presence entered hostile territory. His uncut hair was just the visible physical sign of that internal consecrated reality. It served as the visible sign mediating his divine calling. It anchored his unbroken covenantal relationship with Yahweh. In short, it was the physical sacrament of an invisible grace.
But, under relentless psychological torment from Delilah, his soul becomes sick to death, and Samson tragically yields his sod, a Hebrew word meaning secret or sacred mystery. By surrendering the truth of his consecration to a profane enemy, he isn't just giving up a secret. He is surrendering the entire cosmic architecture of his identity.
Which leads right into Section 4, the ontological fracture. This surrender brings us to the devastating climax of the narrative, which, as we'll see, represents far more than just a physical defeat. When Delilah calls a man in to shave the 7 braids of his hair, it triggers a catastrophic ontological fracture. By surrendering his sacred mystery, Samson completely unravels the divine order in his life. The shaving executes a decreational cataclysm upon his identity. It physically severs the vital covenantal link that allowed the Spirit of Yahweh to empower him, causing the Spirit to depart. I want you to think about this verse for a second, because the phrasing is absolutely chilling. This might literally be the most terrifying realization in all of Scripture. He did not know that the Lord had departed from him. The Hebrew phrase here gives us a rare, truly terrifying depiction of divine withdrawal. The loss of his hair did not magically drain his physical muscles. Rather, the fracture alienated him from the presence of God. Samson's internal perception had become so entirely corrupted by his downward descent that his spiritual blindness completely masked the divine withdrawal. He couldn't even sense the absolute horror that God was gone. The ultimate tragedy of Samson is that he separated his consecration from his communion with the Creator. He treated God's gifts as his own autonomous possessions, which left him spiritually blind long before the Philistines actually gouged out his physical eyes. Finally, Section 5, the true unbreakable deliverer. If we read this canonically, the utter failure of Samson actually forces us to look forward to the perfect fulfillment of this redemptive pattern. Samson's tragic descent from Timnah to Gaza and finally into Sorek perfectly exposes the frailty of the old humanity. But it also sets the perfect typological stage for Jesus Christ, the true bridegroom. You see, Samson is an anticipatory, yet deeply flawed deliverer. Let's look at how this builds into an absolutely incredible contrast between 2 deliverers and 2 outcomes. Where Samson, the flawed deliverer, entered the liminal valley of Sorek and yielded his sacred mystery to the enemy for a destructive union, Jesus Christ, the perfect judge, enters the ultimate liminal threshold of the cross. Where Samson broke his vow and suffered the loss of divine communion, leaving him blind, bound, and exiled, Jesus maintained perfect, unbroken fellowship with the Father. He voluntarily yielded his life to conquer the kingdom of darkness. Samson's failure led to divine abandonment, but Christ's unbreakable fidelity shatters death, redeems his bride, and secures an eternal kingdom. As we wrap up this explainer, let this final thought really challenge you. The story of Samson is a profound cosmic warning about spiritual perception and the true source of our strength. So will you recognize the true source of your consecration, or will you surrender your sacred mystery in the valley of your desires? Will you look beyond your own flawed abilities and rest entirely in the perfect obedience of the true vine? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating theological geography with me today. Keep asking those tough questions, keep studying the text, and I'll see you in the next explainer.